Hi, it's Steve Brown with Two Generals Games, here to show you how the movement and combat system in our new series, Napoleon and His Marshals, operates. Today we'll start with a very simple example to introduce you to the system. And we're in Bavaria on the border of Austria along the Danube River where many of the battles were fought. Today we have an Austrian unit that's white with a green stripe and the Austrian symbol. As in most games like this, the first number is the combat factor, the second number is the movement factor, and it will be in a clear terrain hex where the small reference city of Braunau is. This area is clear terrain, but notice on the north side there is a heavy river. On the south side there's mountain hex sides. This red is the border with Austria. Below that we have two woods hexes and the fort of Salzburg. So we're going to stick this core size unit in clear terrain.
Now let's try slightly more complicated combat, and you can see the effects of terrain. So we're going to put this Austrian unit, instead of in a clear terrain, we're going to put him in here. This is a wooded hex with a small level 1 fort, and it's surrounded on all sides but one with the mountain hex sides. So we're going to put him in here. And now we're going to get the same core. I've replaced a 5 fort with a 4 and a 1, just simply to show you that there's not any difference. It's still 5 factors. And Davout's leading, and he's going to march 1. It could go here. This would be the smart place to go, but let's just assume for the sake of argument that he has to go here. So that's 1, 2, 3. Now, Davout has 10 combat factors, 5 infantry factors, plus the leader, who's worth 5 as well. So that's 10, and it's against a 4, like it was before. But this 4 is in much better defensive terrain. Mountain hex side, woods, and a fort. So now let's take a look at the CRT and see what that means.
Now let's turn our attention to the French units. And we have a 5-4, which we're going to place in clear terrain, having just crossed the Danube. And with it, we have a French supply depot in Ulm, which was a city that was captured very early in the 1805 campaign. Now, in our system, although units could move by themselves, they cannot conduct combat without a leader. So we're going to supply the French with a very good leader indeed, and that's Davout. Let's talk a minute about the numbers on Davout. For now, we'll skip these ones at the top. We'll just focus on the bottom. This is his combat value, which is a 5, and his movement value, which is a 4. So marshals, or corps commanders of the other armies, add their combat value in up to the limit of the combat unit underneath it. That means if Davout was leading a 3 unit, he could not add 5. He'd only be able to add 3. But in this case, he has 5 underneath him. He is a 5, so that's the maximum efficiency, and he's worth 10. Now we'll move his unit toward the Austrians to conduct combat. To do that, we'll go into this Munich, which is a clear terrain hex with a production city in it. And then he'll cross this major river, which is a +1, into this blue clear terrain hex. It's only blue because it indicates it's part of Bavaria. And that's a total of 3 movement factors. 1, 2 for the river, 3 for the terrain. There is a ZOC that costs extra. However, to have a ZOC, a stack must have at least 4 combat factors and a leader. The Austrian unit does not, therefore it does not have a ZOC. So now we're ready for combat, and we'll take a look at the combat results table. Now we're looking at a portion of the combat results table, and I'll explain to you how this works. our system is a diceless system. It's based on our study of the algorithms of Napoleonic battles, and we believe that our system replicates Napoleonic battles at an accuracy of about 90%. That is to say that, to be more precise, 1 out of every 11 combats will be slightly off what they would have gotten historically, but the rest will be pretty much on the money. Now, this is the top of the combat results table, and so your force's combat value indicates, in this case, the value of the French stack. So it's combat value, which means it is the units there plus the leaders and any other modifiers that might be in effect. In this case, there aren't any others. So we'll scroll down here and we'll look at 10, which is the value of Davout and his stack. And his damage to enemy forces is going to be 4. So let me scroll back up at the top here, and you can see damage to enemy forces. Now, this is modified, as you'll see to the columns to the right. If he's in the woods, it's going to be minuses, and at 10, the minus would be 1. At higher levels, it's more severe. If you're attacking across a mountain hex side, it's -1. If you're making a sea invasion, it's -1. If you are in a fort, it depends on what kind of fort it is as to whether it would be reduced. So we have done 4 damage to the Austrians. Well, if you recall, that's all the Austrian value that there is. So the Austrian unit has been completely wiped out, or at least damaged. We'll get into that in a moment. The Austrians, however, get to shoot back at the French. Their value, however, is 4, and their damage that they do to the French stack is 2. So now we'll go back to the map and we'll show you how to assess damage. So now we're ready to apply the losses from the combat results table. The French took 2 hits from the Austrians, but that is applied differently because there's a leader present. Whenever a leader is present, we look at his combat value and the number of units that he protects. In this case, he has a combat value of 5, which means he can protect 5 factors worth of units. I've broken the 5-4 down into a 4 and a 1 so that we can apply the losses. The Austrians did 2 damage. The first damage goes to the units, so there's 1, but the second damage is ameliorated by the leader. So essentially he absorbs that damage, not literally of course, but he prevents that damage from occurring to his units under his command. So the French have taken 1 hit, and we'll distribute that in a moment. The Austrians, as you may recall, took 4 hits from the French, but they have no leader to suffer to absorb any of those losses. So all 4 units are affected negatively. Now what happens to these units? Well, to answer that, we need to take a look at one of the charts that comes with the games. This is an important one. This is the casualties and disrupted boxes. So in a battle, the first damage is always done to disruption, with a few exceptions. If you're surrounded and so on, there may always be casualties. So the first damage is done as a disrupted unit, and that will be able to come back the very next turn if you have a leader present. The second damage is casualty, the third damage is disruption, and so on back and forth until they're all accounted for. If there's an odd number, it'll always be the larger number will be in the disrupted box. The Austrians took 4 damage, so that's going to be 2 in the disrupted box. They'll be eligible to come back soon if there's a leader nearby. And 2 in the casualties box. These are actually killed and wounded, captured. And so they will have to be brought back in through the replacement system, which is more laborious and expensive. And so after that battle is over, Davout remains with himself and 4 units. The Austrians have been eliminated. Davout can advance into the hex of Braunau, and it will now be the Austrians' turn. This example will be slightly more complicated, using the same units and the leaders as before, but we're going to move the Austrian unit from this clear terrain hex into this much more defensible wooded hex with a fort, a level 1 fort, and a mountain hex sides. So we'll put him in there. Davout is going to attack again with the same units. Notice instead of a 5-4, I have a 4-4 and a 1-4. It's exactly the same. And Davout, so he's worth 10 again, and the Austrians are worth 4. Supply is 4 hexes away, in this case only 3, 1, 2, 3, so he's in supply and can make the attack. Now we'll switch over to the combat results table and take a look at the results. As before, Davout's value is 10. This means he does 4 damage to the enemy forces. However, this time that damage is reduced because of the terrain. Looking at the CRT, you'll see the next column adjacent to the number 4 is enemy in woods, which is the case here, so that's -1 damage. The enemy is also across a mountain hex side. That's another -1. Furthermore, there is a fort in the hex. That happens to be a level 1 fort, which reduces the damage by 1 more yet again. So this is a total of -3, which means that the damage the French do to the Austrians this time is just 1. The Austrians do the same damage as before, which is 2. And now let's go to the disrupted and casualties chart to see how the damage gets allocated. So the French have done 1 to the Austrians, which means that this 1 unit is going to go into the disrupted pile, and the Austrians will have a chance to get it back. These 3 remain in play on the map. The Austrians did 2 to the French as before, so there's 1 damage here, and then 1 to Davout, so he avoids taking any additional hits. So the 4 remains behind with Davout, and that leaves a hex that has 3 Austrian combat value against 8 French combat value. So the Austrians have to retreat again, but this time they do so with their core largely intact.